often do you think about the Roman Empire?
How often do I think about it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess technically like every day.
Do you think about the Roman Empire ever?
Yeah, I guess sometimes.
How often?
I don't know. Once a week. How do you not think about the Roman Empire? Basically.
How many times, like a week, or just how many times in general, do you think about the Roman Empire?
What about the Roman Empire?
Just anything about it.
Probably not a lot. Why?
Not a lot. When was the last time you thought about it?
Maybe a week or two ago? The Roman Empire was a very big part in history.
So how often do you think about it?
Not a lot.
How often? Once every month?
Maybe 3 or 4 times a month.
You think about the Roman Empire once a week.
It has a lot of big, stories and lessons, within the Roman Empire of what to do and what not to do. So, yeah.
So you think about the Roman Empire once a week?
Sometimes.
At least once a day.
Seriously?
Absolutely.
Still my fault. Welcome to We Three Kings. Welcome to We Three Kings. I love that. How often do you think about the Roman Empire? Not very often, just like once a week or something. I don't know. But apparently we think about the Roman Empire, a bunch of guys. I don't know if you've caught that TikTok trend, but apparently women, come on, Roman Empire? It's a big deal. No? Okay, well now we're asking whatever your Roman Empire is, which I already know for half of y'all it's Taylor Swift. So, but last week, I said half. Last week, we talked about Caesar, right? And we talked about, and that's what we're really focusing on, is we're spending 3 weeks telling what we're calling the real Christmas story. In other words, in that day and in that time, we're zooming in on 3 important figures that surround the Christmas story. We're calling it We Three Kings. Last week, we looked at Luke's account. We opened up Luke chapter 2, and we really zeroed in on Caesar. And it's interesting to note that Luke says at the beginning of his Christmas story, he says the words, "in the days of Caesar Augustus," because Luke's story of Jesus was really written for the Gentile crowd, which would have included the Romans and the Roman Empire. But this week, we're going to look at the story in Matthew, and I want you to know that Matthew's account was written toward a Jewish audience, and let's see if you catch the difference right from the top. We looked at Luke 2, verse 1 last week. We're going to look at Matthew 2, same verse, verse 1. It says, "After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod." Interesting, he doesn't mention Caesar Augustus, he mentions King Herod. Magi from the east, there's the little, the We Three Kings of Orientar story. That's folklore, but they're just wise men. Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where's the one who has been born King of the Jews?" They're telling the King of the Jews, where's the guy who's been born King of the Jews? He could have just chopped their heads off right here. "We saw a star when it rose and have come to worship him." And then in verse 3, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Verse 4, when he would call together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. And so, just a quick recap, what was the world like at the time of Jesus' birth? Rome, the world was ruled by the Roman Empire. We talked all about that last week with Caesar. We talked from British to India. In fact, we threw up the map, and you can look at this map, and they ruled all of this land. They did it with a huge army by taxing people endlessly and ruthlessly to pay for their army. In this world, and as we enter into the world, and we go back in through Matthew 2 now, not Luke 2, but Matthew 2, we find that through the accounts of Luke and Matthew, you can see that Jesus was born into a world where Caesar was Lord, right? We talked about this. Caesar was ultimately Lord, and Herod was king. Herod's king now. As we have Caesar as Lord and Herod as king. And what does that mean? And that's what we're going to explore a little bit today. I'm going to try to fly through some content today because I'm trying to get somebody somewhere with it. But recognizing that in a world where Caesar is Lord and Herod is king, and we talked all about what that means, Caesar being Lord, but what does it mean that Herod was king? Well, we have this beautiful, did you ever put the pic of Herod up? I wanted to see the beautiful picture of Herod. There's Herod. There's the actual real life kind of depiction of Herod, marble and marble stone. And then you have Herod. This is Hollywood's depiction of maybe what he potentially would have looked like in real life. Pretty good looking guy for, AD 3 or AD 4, who knows? We don't know. But yeah, so we're going to ask the same questions we asked last week. How did Caesar attain his power, and how did Caesar keep his power? Well, let's ask the question. How did Herod attain his power? The first thing you want to know is Herod attained his power from Rome. He was literally given the title King of the Jews from Rome. And you would ask the question maybe, why would Rome give away any of their power to anyone else? Well, if you're Caesar, what are you supposed to do when you rule 3,000 miles from England to India? What do? You set up other people in different partitions. In fact, Josephus wrote this. He said there is an old and long-standing principle of Roman policy to employ kings among the instruments of servitude. In other words, if you're Rome, this is what you do. You go in, you conquer the land, you find a king in that area, and you tell the king, you're going to rule this land on our behalf. You do things our way, and we'll let you rule and stay in power. You don't do things our way, we're going to have more bloodshed. All right, people came from last week. That's so awesome. You're going to have more bloodshed. We really found out how much we love bloodshed last week. So, in the land of Israel, what do? They find this young warrior. He's named Herod. He's half Jewish and half Edomite, which is a big deal because you're calling him king of the Jews, but he didn't really follow any Jewish customs. The Jewish people of the day really couldn't stand this guy, really hated him, didn't follow any of the rituals, didn't really care. And Rome proclaims him king of the Jews. So Herod gets his power directly from Rome. But how was he even known by Rome in the first place for them to want to give him power? Any guesses? Bloodshed! Bloodshed! He was a fierce warrior. He was known as being a fierce warrior. In fact, it's said that he massacred thousands in Jerusalem alone just to take power over Jerusalem. And there's so many stories we could sit on, but you have Wikipedia and Google, and you can type in your own history lessons later. But it's important to note that Herod got his power from Rome and through bloodshed. Now we can look and go, well, how did this guy keep his power? That's what we asked about Caesar last week. We can ask this about Herod this week. How did he keep his power? Any guesses? Bloodshed! We love bloodshed. Yay. Okay. Herod had 10 wives, and they estimate around 20 children, and anybody that he felt threatened by for his kingship, he would kill. And when I say anyone, I mean anyone. For instance, he became suspicious of one of his wives, so he killed her. He became suspicious of one of his sons, so he had them drowned in the pool. We don't know if he was in the pool while he had them drowned or not. That's left to the imagination, but I wouldn't put it past him. Two of his other sons, this is believed to be a time when Herod was on his deathbed, and he believed his sons were conspiring and planning on how they were going to run the kingdom after he died. And just finding out about that they had overlooked him in this way, he brings them into his chambers. He makes them beg and plead for forgiveness. They deny that they're even conspiring against him. These speeches are recorded. What they said to him, literally pleading for their father, like, please don't kill us. You're about to die anyway. We're just talking about what's going to happen after. And instead, he has them executed, and then he dies. So this is who Herod is. In fact, again, Herod, kind of that he didn't mind bloodshed. Why? Because if you've read the Gospels, if you've opened up your Bible at all, which is a good idea, coming to church regularly, you can start to open up your Bible. It might help you get further ahead. But if you do that, you find that Herod finds out from the Magi, from the wise men, actually from his wise men and from the teachers of the law, where's this baby supposed to be born? Oh, where's this baby who's supposed to be king of the Jews? Where's he supposed to be born? Bethlehem. Oh, well then every baby under 2 years old is going to be killed right now, right away. And so Herod would do anything to stay. In other words, if Herod was to stay in power, he had to snuff out any potential threat to his Roman kingship. And he didn't only kill people to maintain his power, he also built really incredible buildings. He built buildings. And so that's the second thing, right? He was bloodshed and built. There it is. How did he keep his power? Bloodshed and buildings. And you might ask the question, how did buildings keep him in power? Well, these buildings, and really calling them buildings is like the most underwhelming statement of the millennia. I'm going to show you a couple examples in a moment. You're going to see like these aren't just sheer buildings. But when he did these build-outs, they were almost always in honor of Rome and Caesar, or it was to appease the Jews so they wouldn't revolt, so that peace could be maintained. And the more he kept peace, the more the more Caesar would keep peace with him. But these buildings were master classes of architecture. To this day, people don't know how they were built. And even the Jews that hated Herod said this. And there's a famous quote that goes around that says, "Whoever has not seen Herod's temple has not seen a beautiful building in his life." Herod built the Jerusalem temple. He built pagan temples. He built Jerusalem amphitheater. He built hippodromes. He built aqueducts to supply fresh water to Masada and Herodium. He built the Masada fortress, amongst many others. And again, when I say buildings, it's the most underwhelming statement. And just remember, I'm going to show you just 3 quick buildings. I'm going to rip through them. Stay with me because each one of them is going to full circle to where we're trying to get today. But just remember, as I show you these, all modern technology is gone. Disappear. There's no cranes. There's no famous, there's no nice crane. There's nothing modern technology. There's no modern technology to help them build this. They just figured out a way. Again, Herod was a master architect. And let's just look at what King Herod builds. For instance, he builds this build out. It's called Caesarea Philippi. Everybody say Caesarea Philippi. Good. This was actually a gift to one of his sons. His son's name was Philip, so that's why the name Caesarea Philippi. But this is the picture of Caesarea Philippi. Do you notice what's in the back? You see? What is the back? Rock. Just mountain, just sheer rock. And from this rock, they build these, they dug out these massive caves in there, and they build these massive temples. Now, why did they build massive temples here? Because here, they worshiped a god named Pan. Pan was half man and half goat. I was going to show you a picture of him, but you can decide for that later. The pictures get a little testy. Okay, that was a joke. Okay. I thought that one late last night. I was proud of myself. I was like, inappropriate. Okay, all right. Sarah says it's inappropriate. She's a superintendent, so we're moving on. Okay. I don't want to go see the principal. Okay. In fact, okay, right underneath that temple, there's a deep cave, and from it flowed just this huge ravine of water. It just flowed nonstop. And what they would do, they believed underneath that temple, they believed this temple, the temple was the gate to the underworld. They believed under the water was the underworld. And what they would do is they'd actually sacrifice goats day in and day out, and if they throw it into the water, and if it flowed all the way to the bottom of the hill, of the pool there, at the last pool, then that was like Pan, the goat god, accepted your sacrifice. And if not, then you had to go back to the market and start all over if the goat sank. And so that's what they do. And again, they believe this temple was the gate to the underworld. Everybody say gate. Everybody say underworld. Cool. So that's what they do there. And again, Herod Philip named it Caesarea Philippi. Why? Who's Caesarea? Caesar. So what were they saying? This is for Caesar's honor, built by Herod. It's literally signed for Caesar by Herod's son. And that wasn't all. One of Herod's most impressive builds, the second one, is the temple. The temple, Herod built this for the Jews. Again, he didn't build it because he liked the Jews. He didn't build it to do a favor for the Jews. He built it because the Jews kept revolting and they kept causing havoc. So he made a peace deal with them, a peace treaty with them. If I build you a giant, huge temple to worship your God in, will you stop revolting so I could stay in power? Caesar can be happy, I could be happy, you could be pacified. And they said, fine, just build us a temple. So Herod builds one of the most amazing infrastructures known to humankind. It's a colossal temple so the Jews could worship God. You can check out this picture right here. Again, the very middle of this is the temple. The whole piece around it, the structure around it, is what's called the Temple Mount. Herod built both of them. He took massive slabs from Mount Moriah, literally carved up mountain. How did they do that back then? Again, you can ask all the questions. And he builds this massive slab. And two things that you want to know about this, not the temple alone, but the whole slab, the Temple Mount, known as the Temple Mount. This is what you're looking at is 12 football fields long of stone from Mount Moriah. And the second thing is that the pictures that you're looking at, go to the second picture, this picture that you're looking at in reference to the whole rest of the city of Jerusalem at the time of Jesus. So what you see behind you, this is a reference point. This is the temple, and this would have been the whole rest of the city of Jerusalem. And this right here is done to scale. That's the whole city, and that's how large the temple is. To this day, I was just there in March, to this day, standing there, and you could see all the way across from the city, and it's just this massive temple mount. Now, the temple's not there anymore, which we'll get to in a minute, but I might have just gave that away. This is a massive build-out of which King Herod took massive slabs of Mount Moriah. And again, when I say massive, why am I making that point? Because it's almost incomprehensible. In fact, you can look, this is under the ground. Go ahead, put that up. This is underground picture. That's Pastor Corey Demo all the way in the back. See the bracing right there, the bottom bracing and the side bracing? That's where I'm standing, taking the photo. And Corey is all the way 40 feet down where the next piece of bracing is. That's how big some of these slabs of stone are. In fact, some of these blocks alone weigh 600 tons. That's 1.2 million pounds. Some are up to, as you could see there, 40 feet long, which you could see in that picture. What you can't see in that picture is they're also 10 feet wide. 10 feet wide. And in that picture, what you can't see is the height. You can't even see the height. We can't even see the height in that picture. Like, how high is it? They're like, well, higher than that. I'm like, what? It's unimaginable. Also, if you're a builder in this room, this was all built, the whole Temple Mount and the temple is built on 0 gradient, meaning it was perfectly level. Perfectly. Thank you. That is the right statement. This is not possible, which is true. They expertly placed slabs of Mount Moriah, one on top of the other, using no plaster and no adhesive to hold them together. Literally, with modern technology, they do not know. They've had engineers studying this, and they do not know how would you get, 1, these massive slabs of mountain, how would you even carve them up? 2, how would you move them? 3, how would you place them on a 0 gradient? It is literally, they cannot solve the equation to this day. And we ask the question, why did Herod build it this way and so massive and so at scale? Not to appease the Jews. The Jews would have been fine with Solomon's temple, which was half that size or a quarter of that size. No, what did this have to do? He was building it this way to display his might, his power, and to impress Caesar. You guys are getting it. And what does this have to do with Jesus? Well, let me tell you about one other place, and then I'll get into that. The third place is Masada. Masada is a fortress for Herod, just in case he ever had to flee. It was a desert land in the middle of a valley, but his own land, Edom, which you're going to see in these pictures in a second. The second picture, you'll see the Dead Sea, and you'll see mountains in the background. That's his homeland, Edom, right in those mountains. So he's thinking, if anything ever does go upside down, if Rome ever starts coming for me, if I have an enemy that starts coming for me, but I'm here on Masada, 1, I'm on a plateau in the desert, meaning I can see from miles away anybody coming at me. 2, it gives me enough time to get across the Dead Sea into my homeland. Will they hide me away or treat me right and keep me safe? Right? So this is what he does. And Masada may have been Herod's ultimate masterpiece for being able to build anything, anywhere. Because I already told you, Masada is a massive plateau in the middle of the desert. So how do you build? How do you get water? How do you get food? Well, some 2,000 years later, this is what it looks like now. This is the top of Masada. Again, I just had the amazing privilege to get to walk these grounds. All these massive, what are they called? On the left side, on the top left side, that's all just full of food back in the day. That would have just been full of food. And these things are massive. They're massive proportions. You have stuff on the right side, aqueducts that he built out there to get water out there. But again, that's 2,000 years later, looking at what archaeologists have now been able to dig up. But if we were to look at it during Jesus' day, it would have looked something like this. Look at that. That's incredible. Herod builds a 3-story palace so he could live in luxury on Masada. There's marble everywhere. He had hot baths. He had cold baths installed. He had Italian columns. He had artists come in and paint all the rooms. Even the servants' quarters, which nobody cared about the servants' quarters back then, he wanted them all painted. He wanted everything eloquent, attention to detail. He has a pool on the roof here. One of the roofs have a pool on it. I mean, this is ultimate luxury, ultimate penthouse. And again, it was done 2,000 years ago. All that is context for what? When we say Herod the Great, When we say King of the Jews, it's really important to know he wasn't just some minor pawn in a Roman scheme. He was willing as well to kill anyone and to build anything to show that he too, not Caesar alone, was incredibly powerful and worthy of being king. We're not talking about some side piece of the story. We're talking about in Matthew 2, when you read, in the days of King Herod the Great, we would pause the same way, almost the same way, if not more, as in the days of Caesar Augustus. Both men are to be greatly feared. Both men have built crazy kingdoms. Herod at this time controlled the religious system of this Jewish day. He controlled the government system. He controlled the economic system. And so what you have as Jesus is born is a group of elites in Jerusalem, and we could ask the same question, well, how are they going to sustain this themselves? How are they going to sustain all the power they've built? Well, what did we talk about last week? Does anybody remember how much Rome taxed the Jewish people at this point in time? 40%. Yes, I love it. We're listening. We're doing like church stuff, but we're like, oh, I love that. Okay, sorry, that pumped me up. My bad. We talked last week about 40%. 40% of people's income was taxed by Rome. But listen, that just took care of Rome. Yeah, their army. That was just Rome's slice. That didn't take care of Herod at all. So Herod, what happens? 80 to 90% of people in Jesus' day are involved in agriculture, right? They did grain, they did fish, they did crops, they did grain. So what we find here in this situation, in this moment in time, is 80 to 90% are providing the food to be eaten for the rich, the haves, the elites that are living in Jerusalem and in the land of Israel. In fact, it's believed that Herod took 25 to 33% of all of the grain and 50% of all of the fish. Somebody gasped just one time. Okay, thank you. 25. So imagine, again, Rome takes their 40%, and then Herod comes in and takes the 50% remaining fish and the 25 to 33% of grain. And we haven't even talked about the tax collectors yet, who are also skimming off the top. So you could see why the Jewish people hated tax. The fact that Jesus showed up and picked a tax collector was mind-blowing. Because they're like, do you understand? We're already, and this is Jew on Jew at that point. So it's like, yo, I'm already getting hit by Caesar. I've already been hit by Herod. And now you're going to skim off the top too. And my family's actually legitimately starving. You can barely, imagine it. You're barely able to feed your family. You've worked all day. Herod and Caesar and the tax collectors are taking just about all of your harvest, all of your crops, all of your fish, so that Herod could have more hot tubs to impress Caesar, and Caesar could build more army to oppress you. And if you had a problem with any of it, they would kill you, more bloodshed. And they didn't have a problem with it. Why? Because Caesar is Lord and Herod is king. This is the world that Jesus was born into. This is the world that Jesus is born into in the back of a cave, and he's supposed to do something about it? Can you just start to put some skin on the story? Some baby's born in the back of a cave, and I'm supposed to care about this. Why? Because who? Do you see Herod's builds? Do you see Masada? Oh, maybe you haven't seen the temple. Maybe you haven't seen Caesarea Philippi. Maybe you haven't seen Caesarea, which I didn't even have time to show you, which is just a colossus, the greatest port known to mankind in its day. Maybe you haven't seen the greatness of Caesar's army. I think you're mistaken. A baby cannot do anything to change this. Do you hear? Do you hear? Start to put some skin on the story. And we could ask, well, what are these buildings? What are these places? What are these fortresses? What are these cities? What do they have to do with Jesus? Well, if we open up our Bible, you could open it up to Matthew 16. And in Matthew 16, you're going to read this verse at 13. It says, when Jesus came to the region of, everybody say it. Oh, we start to get a picture. We start to actually see, like, oh, he went there. And by the way, Caesarea Philippi was north. Jesus is hanging out in the region of Galilee doing ministry. Caesarea Philippi is like a 5-day walk out of the way. Do you know where he goes from Caesarea Philippi? straight down to Jerusalem. Do you know what he does in Caesarea Philippi? Just makes these statements and then goes. This is like the equivalent of us going, hey, take a 5-day walk with me somewhere so I can make a quick point so we can go walk the other direction. Number one, how much do you hate me? Number two, how important does that point need to be? Hello. Okay. So he came to the region of Caesarea Philippi. He asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah, one of the prophets. But what about you, he asked, who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Amen. Hallelujah, Simon. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, which has a whole bunch. We could go in so many different directions. Peter means Petrus, means rock, little rock. Okay, we're not even go there. I can't go there. And that you are Peter. And on this rock, what did you see in the picture behind the temples? Jesus is sitting there, and he goes, and on this rock, this big rock right here, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Oh, I forgot to tell you. I didn't forget to tell you. I wanted you to have tons of suspense in this moment right here, so I did it on purpose. But the gates of the underworld were referred to in Jesus' day as none other than the gates of Hades. That's what the temple there is referred to as the gates of Hades. The underworld, the pond that they threw, the spring that they threw the goats into was referred to as the gates of Hades. And Jesus says, on this rock I'll build, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. So what's happening here is Jesus actually looks at Peter in the eye and says, on the rock of Gentiles, I will build my church. You guys, we're about to go to Jerusalem, and you think this is the Holy Land, and you think only goodness can come from this, and you think only God can flow through this. But I'm about to let you know that that's not where my gathering is actually going to flourish and get its start. No, on the rock where they currently worship pagan gods, you're going to watch my gathering spread all the way to here. And the literal gates of Hades will not prevail against it, will not overcome it. The gates of Hades will not outlast the gathering that I'm about to bring birth to. And let me just say this. He didn't lie. Praise Jesus, right? Like, that's what we're here, right? To keep finding Jesus is more truthful. How do you know he didn't lie? Because the gates of Hades didn't prevail. The gates of Hades didn't outlast it. How do you know? Because I told you I was there, and I stood where the gates of Hades used to be. That's where the gates of Hades used to be. You can show them the second picture too. Where's the temple? It's gone. It's destroyed. The rock's still there, but the temple's not there. The gate is literally gone. It's vanquished. It's mere prints in the sand. They're gone. But the gospel of Jesus Christ being spread day in and day out, year in and year out, and the gathering of his people in his name continues to last for millennia. Somebody say amen. For millennia. Because kings and Caesars, catch this, Caesars and kings will come and go. Caesars and kings will come and go, but the gathering of people in Jesus' name has lasted millennia. And that's what Jesus is making this bold declaration going, you think Caesar has all the power. You think Herod has all the power. You think your addiction has all the power. You think your depravity has all the power. You think the thing you're up against has all the power. You think your debt has all the power. I don't think you understand. Caesars and kings and all of these things that you keep pointing to, you're going to think they have all the power, but they don't have the power. I alone have the power. I have the words of life, and they don't turn back void. Then we look at the temple. The temple, the Pharisees said it could not be destroyed. And the disciples were so impressed with the build out of the temple. They're like, King Herod, you're so amazing. You built this amazing, huge temple. In fact, how do I know that? Because it's times we just opened the Bible, Matthew 24, 1-2. Jesus left the temple. And he was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. Jesus, look at the buildings. Look at what Herod's built. It's never, the Pharisees say it can't be destroyed. Pharisees built perfectly. Rome even sits back and goes, wow, how do you do it, Herod? Right? Jesus not impressed. Jesus is not, I love Jesus is a baller in these moments. It's so great. It's so ridiculous. He goes, do you see all these things, he asked? And then he says, truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. every single one will be thrown down. That can't happen. The temple's too large. The temple's too big. The temple's too great. Not one stone. And don't you remember about the stones I showed you? That's to the Temple Mount. But the temple was made from the same stone. The temple was made of colossal size as well. And so you have this going, this is way too big of a structure. It's too perfectly placed not to be destroyed. And yet, Jesus, at the end of Matthew 24, it's the Olivet Discourse, if you care to know, at the end, he says, all of these things will come to pass within this generation. Within 40 years, Rome shows up to Jerusalem. And you can play that video. This is me in Israel. This is our tour guide, and he is showing us, here's the Temple Mount, here's the temple, here's what you see. Jesus says the statement, and all of a sudden, if you fast forward 40 years, you have Rome show up. You actually have a general named Titus, and this general Titus comes, and he lays complete siege, complete waste to the temple. And what do as they're laying complete siege to the temple? They take each stone. They literally tear it down brick by brick. They light it on fire, and they take each stone and literally roll every single stone to the corner of the Temple Mount and throw it off of the Temple Mount. And how do you know that there's not another remnant of the temple? Because Rome eventually rebuilds in the exact same spot where the temple was, their own temple, but this time to their god, Jupiter. And that trend has continued on. Another god after another god has been built a temple on that Temple Mount. Here are the stones, some 2,000 years later, that you could see for yourself if you go to this land of Israel. And these are some of the pieces of the temple stone that have literally what? Not been left. Not one stone on another. Again, just as Jesus predicted in his Olivet Discourse, and within that same generation, what happened? It all came to pass because kings and Caesars come and go, but Jesus holds the words of life. So where else shall we go? And Masada has everything to do with this as well. Has everything to do with this concept that heaven and earth will pass away, but the words of life will never fade away. Kings and kingdoms will come and go, but the words of life will never fade away. Jesus has this whole thing. I said it's called the Olivet Discourse. You can read it for yourself in Matthew 24. But he opens it with that verse 1 through 2, and he closes it in 34 through 35. And he says the same sentiment. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. And the Olivet Discourse was pointing directly to the destruction of Jerusalem by Rome in the war of AD 69 and 70. It happened. Everything Jesus predicted in Matthew 24 happened in AD 69 and 70. Just as Jesus called it with the temple, just as Jesus called it with the gates of Hades, 40 years later, the Roman army shows up, surrounds Jerusalem, starts destroying the city. But there's one final stand against the Roman army. One final stand during the Jewish revolt. And it was a mere 60 miles away in none other than Masada. They run, they flee to Masada. And what happens on this final Jewish stand, Rome does exactly what they did with Jerusalem. They just get to the base and they just surround Masada and they wait them out. And one by one, these Jewish soldiers die. And as they get up to the top, what they find is a pile of Jewish bodies. They find a pile of bones, dead bodies. But see, these men knew something that Rome didn't know. They were willing to die for something that the Romans did not understand. The sentiment was, heaven and earth will pass away, but the words of life will never fade away. Kings and kingdoms will come and go, but the words of life will never fade away. Because the story doesn't actually simply end with a group of Jewish soldiers dying at the hand of Rome. We didn't know until 1947 when the state of Israel was reintroduced to the world and they began to do archaeological digs on Masada again. But what they found was in this place where they found this is where this pile of Jewish bodies would have been, and where they find all these dead bones, and then off to the side of it, they find, what do they find? A little random spot there that they believed was a makeshift synagogue, because Herod wouldn't have built a synagogue because he didn't care about Jewish. But with these Jewish soldiers, when they got up there, one of the first things they did was, where's our synagogue? So they made a makeshift synagogue. And when they walked into the makeshift synagogue, they found one single scroll. And this is what it read. Ezekiel 37. The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. Then he said to me, prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you, and make flesh come upon you, and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So he began to prophesy, and he watched as breath entered them. He watched as skin attached to their tendons. He watched as life came. Why? Because the truth is, kings and kingdoms will come and go. There will be Caesars and Herods and kings and rulers and presidents and queens. But the hope of Christmas is that there is a God. He's a living, breathing God. His name is Yahweh, and he will find a way through the darkest of situations to always bring forth light. What we're talking about is kingdoms that are beyond comprehension. We're talking about Caesars that are beyond beyond comprehension of how much power they attained. We're talking about kings that built things that you and I could never imagine building, and our society still is trying to figure out how they built it with all of our modern technology. And that's the day that Jesus Christ, a baby, is born in the back of a cave in the darkest of places. But there was a star, a shining star piercing through in the great mode of darkness everywhere. There's one light shining through. Why? Because Herod will never have the final say, and Caesar will never get the final say. Whatever your king is, whatever your kingdom is, if it's addiction, if it's depression, if it's debt, if it's divorce, the Christmas story isn't about reindeer and more people just getting more stuff. It's about a baby being born in the back of a cave, and somehow that baby depicts and says, this kingdom will come and go, but there's a kingdom, there's a gathering of people in my name, and 2,000 years from now, we'll still be worshiping him, we'll still be praising him, we'll still be living for him. So hopelessness has no place. It has no place. It has no place. Not in the light of the most powerful king. Not in the light of the most powerful ruler named Caesar. Hopelessness was introduced by men like Caesar and Herod. But hope entered the world as a baby in a cave. And if you'll follow that, if you walk into that hope, if you walk into that life, if you walk into that light, do you understand? Jesus as a baby, Jesus as a man, Jesus in his death and Jesus in his resurrection had the power to change that world. This immeasurable world, this unattainable world, and he has the power to change that. Imagine what he could do in your life. Your gods, your mini gods, they're small in comparison. They're nothing in comparison. Hear the heart of a Christmas story. This is just one more way to tell the Christmas story. There's so many different ways to look at it. This is just one way through the land. But it should breed hope in the most hopeless of situations for us. Because there's a king. His name is Jesus. His name is Yahweh. And he came and changed even that. He could certainly change you. In Jesus' day, Caesar was Lord and Herod was king. And then Jesus was born. God, thank you for this time. Thank you for the service. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for coming in one of the worst situations possible. Thank you for coming when Caesar had all the power and Herod had all the might. And thank you for being impressed with the widow's mite instead. Thank you for coming and speaking against it. Thank you for reminding us that the oppressors don't win, that the cancer doesn't win, that depression doesn't win, that anxiety doesn't win. God, it doesn't get the final say. Kings and kingdoms and rulers and Caesars and queens will come and go, but your words, they never turn back void. God, may we in this Christmas season remember that you are the reason for this season, and that as we serve you and as we cling to your words, God, even to the point of death, we can cling to your words and know that they are resolute, that they come through, that they are true. I pray right now that in the midst of any type of hopeless situation in this room, that we would immediately begin to cling to your words, that we would cling to the life that you gave us, the example that you gave us, from a baby being born in a cave that took down kingdoms, rulers, principalities, and powers that are unimagined. I thank you for it. In Jesus' name, amen.